in our first session of the day here, I'd like to introduce Adam Taylor. He's the UK privacy lead at Google. He's going to talk to us a little bit about consumer trust and really approaching privacy centricity from the consumer perspective. Adam?
Thank you very much. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. As the first Googler to say hello to you today, welcome to our office in Covent Garden. Unfortunately, we didn't bring the weather for you. We'd have a lovely balcony outside, but believe me, in the summer, that's a very nice place to enjoy happy hour. As Lucas said, I'm Adam Taylor. I'm the privacy lead at Google Marketing Platform in the UK, and I've been in that role for around about 4 years now. So previously to that, I was a technical sales lead across the various Google Marketing Platform products. So I may have come across you in another life and talked you through our ad server or our demand-side platform. And I have to admit that after experiencing a couple of tricky questions when I was in the middle of an ad server discussion with a big multinational client in the States, it actually quickly took me down a rabbit hole when it comes to ads privacy. After that rabbit hole and those tricky questions were around Safari's ITP at the time about 4 years ago, and we didn't have a particularly strong answer when it comes to the way that our products were impacted. So I came back from that meeting and essentially looked around the business and looked for different ways in which I could hopefully upskill myself and improve. And I secured a sales rotation into our engineering function in the US and began the process of digging and learning a little bit more about the topic of privacy and how our products and services needed to adapt to meet these changing times. It's been fascinating, but at times frustrating, as you can no doubt imagine, but something that I've really enjoyed. And I appreciate that's not normally something that you would kind of think about when you think of potentially a role in sales, talking about something which technically is very complex, where there's not always a clear-cut answer. But over the course of those 4 years, I've attended countless conferences, events, I've spoken at a couple as well, and I've always found that we've been greeted with a very similar image. So who's seen something like this in the past? Must have seen something similar where you essentially have a chain, right? So we have on the left-hand side these platform updates. Notice just Safari and Firefox in that one for now. Soon to be Google Chrome, and the regulation changes. As we move through the chain, you have a confused marketer with no facial features in this particular example. But if you read these 4 buckets here, you can start to think that the facial features will be that perhaps of panic, of fear, of frustration. And ultimately, what we typically tend to do in these scenarios is springboard straight to the very, very right of this diagram, which is the solutions and the solves and the technical opportunities that we have. And as a technical industry, that's great. We've got so many people here and so many great minds that are going to be able to talk through a lot of those solves. And I'm not going to be the one that does that for you today, because there are a lot of people that are much more qualified than I am. But what I'm really looking at trying to do today is to think about, well, what happens if actually we go left? What happens before the platform updates, before the regulation changes, and we go back? We go back to consumers, we go back to people, and we go back to you and me. We go back to people who use the internet. And we're fortunate at Google that when people come to our platform, that typically they give us a really good indication of what it is they're interested in. Google Search is one of the primary indicators for intent online. And what we saw over the last few years is that the terms private browsing was up 25% in terms of the search interest in the UK alone since 2019. And across Europe, that's actually much higher, at 50% up in the same period. So it shows us that people are still wanting great online experiences, but they're increasingly looking to do it in a privacy-conscious way. And as brands, no doubt many of you in this room, you want to continue to deliver experiences to those consumers, but ultimately that lead to growth and lead to performance on your side as well. And this is the tension between privacy and performance. And our market research team at Google love the idea of tension. It's kind of the metal detector ping that lets them know that they're in the right space when it comes to finding insight. Because when they find insight, they can create opportunity. And that's really what I'm going to take you through for the rest of my time today. So I'm going to start with a little bit of audience participation and ask you all to raise your hand if you have a driver's license. Everyone's a driver. Interesting. And can I ask you to keep your hands raised if you would say you own a driver's license and you enjoy driving? A few people lost their hands. And then those of you brave enough, please shout out, why do you enjoy driving? What springs to mind when you think about why you enjoy driving?
I love my Tesla.
Love my Tesla. Fantastic. Control. Excellent. Anyone else? Freedom. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Thank you. I'll ask you to drop your hands now. So that's always interesting, and those types of words typically tend to come up quite commonly. And then to build on, who's actually experienced a drive in an autonomous vehicle or a driverless vehicle? We have one brave soul there. Can I ask you what your experience was like, sir?
It was in North Greenwich.
North Greenwich?
Yeah, they had these like 4-person pods that would take you from the tube station to the door.
Excellent.
It wasn't a long journey.
Wasn't a long journey. How did you find it?
Yeah, nice.
Good.
I trusted it because it wasn't on the road.
It wasn't on the road. Okay, got you. Anyone else had any experiences with autonomous vehicles or not yet? Well, typically what you tend to find is that people feel perhaps a little bit nervous or scared. And there's a reason why. And if you ask people the question about driving like I did, typically you tend to get the words that you all said, freedom, being able to set my own time, getting from A to B, whatever it might be. But the underlying kind of psychology of that is really that it's just about being in control. Because there's very kind of few spaces in our life where we have that level of control. If you think about it, you have a steering wheel, you turn it left, goes left. You turn it right, goes right. You put your foot on the brake, it slows down. And you put your foot on the accelerator, it speeds up. So it's why actually in autonomous vehicles that they are experimenting with inputting steering wheels into that vehicle, just so that if you feel like you need to take control, you have that opportunity to do so. So you're probably sat here thinking, why are you trying to sell me an autonomous vehicle or talk to me about driving? But this all does come back to privacy research. Because a couple of years ago, we did a piece of research with Ipsos, which some of you may have seen, which was called Privacy by Design, Exceeding Customers' Expectations. And we wanted to try and find about what was a good experience when it came to sharing data with a particular brand. And what good felt like through that research was actually when people felt they were in control. Now that's different to being in control. It's not offering dashboards and toggles and buttons for them to adjust settings, although that helps. It's more about the feeling of control. And it came out that the feeling of control could actually be created if you did 3 things. That's by making it meaningful, memorable, and manageable. So by making it meaningful, you are actually making sure it's something that is, they're aware of what's in it for them. An end user is aware of what's in it for them if they move forward on this process with you and they consent to share data. The second is making it memorable. If you can't remember consenting to something, then in your mind as a consumer, it's almost as if you never have. So the conscious permission idea of here of making it memorable, making it an experience that people really understand and that they remember, again, is really important. And then finally, making it manageable. And even though they may not want to go back into their individual settings and make those adjustments, they want to know that they have the ability to do so, should they wish. So those 3 things, making it meaningful, memorable, and manageable, all ultimately added up to this feeling of control and this better feeling of control. And then a really interesting finding that came from that even further is that those kind of the tension that you typically tend to see between privacy and performance being at odds was actually kind of debunked a little bit by the research and the findings that we saw. So when people felt like they were in control and they felt like they were trusting a brand perhaps a little bit more, they actually found the communications and the ads from those brands to be up to twice as relevant, and they were emotionally 3 times more positive to that brand. So it tends to suggest that if you get your privacy right, that it actually has these downstream impacts on business performance, which is a win-win situation when you think about it from a so-called tension. So once we had that research, which was a couple of years ago, that led us to want to go a little bit deeper. So how do we go a little bit deeper? By doing another piece of research. So our market research team, again, worked with Ipsos and extended the Privacy by Design research into a new version of it called Privacy by Design, the benefits of putting people in control. This time it was expanded, so it surveyed 10,000 people. They were across 5 different European countries of the UK, France, Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. And we did it across 5 industry verticals as well, and they were retail, travel, tech, telco, and FMCG. Now, this research has since been mirrored in various regions as well, so if you are based in different areas and in APAC and in Americas, there are versions of this as well, but for the purpose of today, I'll be focusing on the EMEA results. So we divided these groups of people, these 10,000 people, into 4 groups and gave them very different privacy scenarios to start understanding how it was impacted. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of a live replication of that in the room today. So what I'm going to say is that the first group, so say these people on this right-hand side of the room here today, you were unfortunately involved in a data breach. And what happened in that data breach is that your personal information was compromised. It may have included your financial and payment information, and it happened last week, and I'm just telling you about it now. So you're likely to not be particularly happy with me here. So that was our first group. So this group, we're having the data breach. Our second group, this group here, you were given what we refer to as a minimum legally required privacy experience, i.e. We interpreted the regulations to mean that we had to request certain forms of consent or ask certain questions of you before accessing our content, and we delivered it by the letter of the law. So a very kind of minimum legally required group. So we have that as this group here. Then we move on to a positive scenario. So we have this section of the room here who had a positive scenario. So building on those learnings from that first research about what it was that was actually a positive experience, we gave people the ability to control certain aspects of data collection and ultimately gave them a lot of transparency around what they were consenting to. So a positive privacy experience. And then finally, all the way over here to the left-hand side of the room, we gave you everything that the positive group got, but we also offered you a monetary discount. We also offered you money off, a discount, a voucher code, whatever it might be. So ultimately, they were our 4 groups, and what we typically tended to expect when we were thinking about the idea of trust with personal data was this. We expected the group out here to the right-hand side, you're not going to trust us with your personal data based on what you've been through, all the way through to the group here on the left-hand side being perhaps the most trusting when it comes to providing that data because of the experience that they've had. But consistently, across all 5 countries and all 5 industry verticals, we actually saw something slightly different. Yes, the group on the right-hand side here in the data breach did see a major decrease in their trust with their personal data with that brand, up to 44%. And that's largely because, as we said, financial information included, and people feel particularly scared when it comes to the terminology of a breach. But what was really interesting is this minimum legally required privacy experience, which is pretty much following what regulation states, they were actually almost as severe in terms of the response that they had as a data breach. So 35% decrease in trust with a particular brand given that experience, which tends to suggest that if you're investing tons of money trying to avoid the nightmare scenario of a data breach and investing a lot in data security, it's actually probably data privacy that's probably more pertinent to really invest in and really get a grip on. So then in our 3rd groups, we expected obviously an increase and a positive, for the positive scenarios, we expected that to increase, and naturally we did see an increase, so a 13% increase for those that experienced this positive scenario. So notice here that the number is absolutely kind of a lot smaller than it is in the decrease scenario and in the bad scenario, which again tends to suggest that if you have a bad experience or an improper experience with a brand, it's a lot harder for you to row back and to actually then regain that trust. And then this final group, the group that we expected to be incredibly positive with what it was that we were ultimately collecting and the most trusting, actually they significantly weren't as happy as the previous group. Any suggestions why you think that might be? Feel like they've been bought? Yep. Anything else? Too many choices? Yeah, too much going on. Well, that's kind of consistent with the hypothesis that we thought as well, which was that if you bundle this idea of kind of money off or a discount or something from a commercial incentive with the idea of data sharing, it actually kind of conflates both of those things and makes someone feel perhaps a bit suspicious. That's not to say that money off and vouchers and discounts aren't a good commercial instrument, because ultimately they are. We're aware of that. But in this instance, when it comes to actually binding it with data sharing agreements, it's probably not something that perhaps we'll be moving forward with as much. And this one particular respondent from the UK, actually said that unless he was really interested in buying a particular item, probably skip that monetary discount as it comes across as catch conditional. And again, words that you mentioned here, bribed, bought, paid off, typically tend to kind of come up a lot in the research as well. So some really interesting insights just from a couple of kind of key findings there from the report, and it naturally goes into a ton more detail that you can go back and read in your own time. But to continue our driving analogy here, this is all fantastic theory, and you can know what every sign on this board means, know the speed limits with where you're going to go, but unless you can do a 3-point turn and reverse around a corner, you're not going to be getting your driver's license. So what about the practical steps then that you can take as brands or as businesses to actually transform that into action and actually some practices that you can deliver on a day-to-day basis? So we wanted to build on that further. So this time we interviewed another 10,000 people, same countries, same verticals, but instead put together a ton of privacy practices in different variations to ask them their opinions on it, how it would make them feel, how comfortable they would be with trusting a brand with their personal data as a result. And again, the results we think are really interesting. So all 9 of these actions, as you can see here, actually resulted in a positive uplift in creating that feeling of control. Now, you might recognize some of these here, so sending privacy digest emails or asking for consent to personalize experiences or websites. You might recognize some of these from perhaps either your own brand's privacy experience or also potentially more so from another brand that you use and you're comfortable with online and that you feel familiar with. And I think what's really interesting here is that each of them kind of ladder up into this idea of kind of creating that feeling of control. And those of you with good kind of mental arithmetic in the room will be able to know that the top three there, the 14, 9, and 9, adds up to an increase of 32% in isolation, if you think about them. But what we saw is actually when they're bundled together and you're actually using them kind of in combination, it creates this multiplicative effect. So you're seeing actually a higher increase in the level of control when you're offering a solution that's bundled with various others here. So there's some really interesting stats that come from that, and the research delves a lot further into various areas of kind of practical application of privacy, which I think is really interesting and certainly something that you can take back. And one of the key stats, again, which isn't mentioned on this slide, is that there's actually 49% of respondents in the UK would be willing to switch to their second choice brand if it offered a better privacy experience than their first. So there's real commercial benefit to getting this stuff right and really investing the time and energy to actually upfront make sure that you're communicating in the right and effective way. And look, this is a journey that Google are on as well. So, we often tend to talk to you in scenarios like this, very much in a B2B capacity, right? About our ad tech offerings, our MarTech offerings, or media solutions. But really, when you kind of wind that back and go back to our B2C products, so your Google account, your signing, whatever it will be to our devices or to the Pixel phones, ultimately, research like privacy by design actually really comes as part of that kind of build process for these products. And our ambition is to continue to deliver products that ultimately are secure by default, private by design, and offer users control. And a good example of this is the My Ad Center, which some of you may have seen, some of you may not. But ultimately, it's an extension of the Google account where you can go in and offer and have granular controls on the type of data that's being used to power the ad experiences you have across Google's owned and operated media. So for the first time, you're able to tell us as end consumers what you want as well as what you don't want from advertising when it comes to your experiences across Google. And Ad Center is trying to create that kind of personalized content service when it comes to ads as well. We've seen a big uptick in people that are using the kind of the product, and personally myself, I can say that it does tend to work. This is a live screenshot from my own My Ad Center. I have recently just purchased a Komodo Joe barbecue. If there's any cooking enthusiasts here, they're very good pieces of kit, I will definitely say. No doubt meat and poultry recipes tend to follow that, and then because I've spent a silly amount of money on a gadget, I am now in debt to my other half to make sure that we have a spa weekend to make sure that I'm distributing as well as fairly as I can. So a really good example here of how privacy by design is coming into some of these products and features. So you can start seeing that kind of crop out in a number of different ways across Google's commercial set. And another example here would be the Privacy Sandbox. Now again, most people in this room, no doubt, will be thinking of Privacy Sandbox with their B2B hat on. You'll be thinking of APIs, of topics, of Fledge, of all these different kind of technical ways that you can continue the work that you do from a marketing perspective. But the upshot of that is that the front end of that is going to be consumer facing for the most part, and it's a tool that consumers who use the Google Chrome browser and the Android operating system will be able to use to set granular controls dependent upon what they want to see and how they want to experience the internet. So again, another example of how this idea of kind of privacy by design is being built into these products at a consumer level, and we're starting to see significant impact and significant involvement and action from our consumers off the back of it. So let's go back to perhaps where we started, back to our image, back to the start of the day here. And hopefully that privacy by design research has given you some interesting insight that perhaps maybe you either weren't expecting or something that you can take back to your business tomorrow. My key takeaway here would be that the research can actually help set the tone for a number of decisions that are made by different businesses. And so the idea is to go back, take it, absorb it, present it back to different people in the organization. And if you need any support in that, then the Google team are more than happy to do so, because we love talking about this research, and it's two versions of it so far, and it is back again for a third version later this year where we're extending the survey and going into more detail as well. As I said, we've seen a number of customers that have really benefited from actually taking that back and having a much deeper conversation about it. And the better that marketing can be involved in those conversations, or analytics can be involved in those conversations about the tone, the communications, and the way that you approach it, the better, hopefully, longer term it will be for a marketer to solve all of these challenges and concerns that we have here. So throughout the rest of today, you're going to have tons of content, which is essentially going to be a springboard from here out to the right into the solutions and what you can do as a marketer. And if I really try and think about how we structure our thinking at Google about this particular challenge, then this slide is probably the best way visually that I could think to kind of explain it. So it all starts on the left-hand side here with those business objectives, and that's both kind of KPIs that you're set, but also the first-party data that you're able to collect and the way that you engage with customers. As we kind of move into this second bucket, this idea of conversion excellence, that's really where we're talking about maximizing the volume of conversions that you're able to see, or the volume of interactions you're able to see, not necessarily just conversions, and also assigning a value to those conversions based on that business objective data that we talked about. Because ultimately, if you don't do that part right in the first instance, by using tools like consent mode, enhanced conversions, and Google Analytics 4, ultimately what you're doing in the second or in the middle part here, which is the automation powered by Google's AI products, really it's not pointing at the right thing. It's not directed at the right value for you as a brand. And that's really where the secret comes to actually using these things in the best possible way. So whether it's smart bidding in search, whether it's performance max across the owned and operated channels, or whether it's the attribution products as well, ultimately it's all fueled by what you're putting into it from the start. And there's tons of content coming up, as I said, that are going to talk you through how to set up and how to structure to make sure that you're doing that in the best way. And then as we move out of the kind of the technologies and the tools, that there are opportunities to go and prove value further. So how do you continue to communicate the value using things like media mix modeling and using longer term studies like incrementality as well? Because ultimately that all drives what we all want on the right-hand side, which is this idea of growth. Now whether that's just in terms of pure sales or whether it's in terms of any other objectives you had, ultimately that's what every modern marketer is challenged with. So hopefully thinking about it in these contexts will help. But really everything that we've spoken about here and what I've spoken about in the early part of that is actually this idea of building customer trust via these responsible marketing practices and making sure that you're doing that and having that underpinning everything that you're planning to do moving forward. Because longer term, we do truly believe that responsible marketing is that opportunity for growth. And each and every business will need to go through different processes for defining data principles, establishing how they want to show up for their customers and making sure that they're doing so in a way that reflects their brand values in the best way. We believe that could be the foundation for future marketing success. And I also would like to say that I'm incredibly fortunate with the Privacy by Design research because it has afforded me the opportunity to wrap up a presentation in perhaps my favorite way. By firstly saying I hope you found it meaningful and it gave you something which hopefully you're able to take back into your day-to-day role and able to take back to your desk tomorrow. That you found it memorable, that there's something in there that you're going to take back, whether it's the research itself, whether it's thinking about structuring your conversations as a marketing lead on the topic of privacy and going back into different areas of the business that perhaps you wouldn't have already done. And hopefully it's made it a little bit more manageable, a little bit more digestible, and now you can enjoy the rest of the content today, set your roadmap, set your structures and your strategies with this underpinning research in your mind. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much for having me, thank you for listening, and I would like to hand back to Lucas now for the rest of the day.
I think all good, thank you.